Good evening, everyone. I call to order the regular meeting of the Victoria City Council for Monday, June 8th at 6:30. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, Dana, I think we can skip with the announcements of calling in. I think people have heard that enough times now. Is there any other announcements? No other announcements. All right, thank you. Open forum, we do have one email submitted by a resident related to agenda item 6.5. When we get there, I'll read that item into the record. Is there anybody else that wants to speak or anything else for open forum? Seeing none, from the council, can I please get a motion to adopt the final agenda, please?
I make a motion to adopt the final agenda.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, council? Staff? No changes? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously, and the agenda is adopted. Next, consent agenda. Council, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda, please?
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Got a second. Thank you. Discussion. Does anybody want to pull anything from the consent agenda? Going once, twice. Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. Motion carries unanimously. Okay. First item of business tonight is 6.1, purchase of one set of battery-powered extraction tools for fire department. Chief Andrew.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. So tonight there's an opportunity on the agenda in front of you to purchase a demo set of tools, and that would allow for some significant savings over what a new set would cost. So this project was identified in the 2021 CIP as a project to kind of align with the replacement of an engine. At that time, these tools that we currently have will be 16 years old. So we were contacted by our local vendor. They were looking to upgrade their demo set and get rid of their current set, which is about a year old. So if we're able to take advantage of that opportunity, we can basically swap out the tools we have today for $13,000 versus if we were to buy that new, and that factors in a trade-in value on our old tools. If we were going to buy that set new, we'd be pushing $32,000 to $33,000. So, so taking advantage of the trade-in value of our current set, and then also the demo pricing on the set that the vendor has allows for some significant cost savings. So we felt this was worth bringing forward. Like I said, it's not a budgeted item this year, but we've worked with the finance department, and the cash is there to do so this year. What this would also allow is we were originally slated to replace both sets of tools next year. If this project goes through, we would push that other replacement off approximately another 5 years, barring no significant changes in the automotive technology that would drive the need for new tools. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Chief. Council, any questions?
No, I think that's a great help to the city. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Do we need a motion on this then?
Yes.
Council, can I get a motion, please?
I make a motion to approve the purchase of a set of extrication tools from Clary Safety Equipment for $13,000.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Council, further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thanks for saving the taxpayers the money.
You're welcome.
Yes.
Okay, next up, 6.2, financial management plan for water and sanitary sewer services, rather. Tammy, for the record, name and position, please.
Mayor Council, Tammy Omdal with Northland Securities. I have an abbreviated version of the presentation that the City Council received during your work session. So for the viewing public, if they're interested in more detail, I'd encourage them to watch that or to listen to that. So with that, I'm going to go through it. Mayor, I'm happy to take questions as I'm going through if the council has some and you want to entertain them.
Perfect.
As we discussed at the work session, this plan and nearly 90 pages is really meant to be a guide for the city in making decisions with respect to setting rates for the utility, determining an appropriate mix of pay-go financing for capital improvements and debt issuance. It is not exactly what you're going to do over the next 10 years, but it will hopefully inform those decisions. And as we discussed at the work session, the other benefit of the approach is that Northland is going to turn that model over to the city, and then the city finance staff will be able to update those assumptions and continue to inform the council's decision as you go forward. We focused on two things: revenue sufficiency and rate calculation. Revenue sufficiency focused on meeting both the current and the future projected obligations. The city, in your long-term capital improvement planning, has identified those projects. Certainly those amounts and timings will change, but it helps to inform that revenue planning. Minimizing future debt issuance was one of the objectives of the plan. That is an annual decision that the city council makes as you approve and update your CIP, but certainly as we looked at the long-term planning, it was meant to minimize debt issuance. And revenue sufficiency, a focus on those three purposes for ending cash balances, ensuring that the city has cash on hand to meet a minimum of 3 months of operating expense. That is a recommendation. City council, as you go forward, will inform that decision. Certainly cash on hand to meet the following year debt service, existing debt that is coming due. Cash on hand to meet pay-go obligations where you're planning to use cash to pay for capital versus issuance of debt. And then the amount above that representing what would be available for reserves or unplanned events or future capital improvements. With respect to the water rate calculation, I'm going to speak about water first and then sanitary sewer. Your current rate structure is you have a base rate and then you have an in-season water volume that the city bills based upon 10 tiers, block rates as they're commonly referred to. You also have an off-season rate for water volume that's billed at the first block rate. Mayor, there is a question by Councilmember Black.
Yep, go ahead.
I want to understand this 10-tier on-season, off-season. I didn't see that, how it was broken down. Was that in the report?
Yes, I'm going to jump ahead, and this is small print, but if you, on your monitors. So presently for water, there are 10 different tiers, and there's maximum volumes at each of those tiers. And that is true with the exception of winter. For your winter billing season, you bill water based upon one tier. Does that answer your question?
Do we know why we do that?
I don't know the history, and I think it's been so long-standing, it predates your existing staff. I had mentioned at the workshop, less than 2% of the cities in the metro area have more than, I think it's 5 billing the block rates. So Victoria is unique in that. I don't have the history on it, but I do know that it is unique with respect to how you're set up. And that's not to say this is a report for you to consider. The city council may say, well, we like having 10 block, and after you get feedback, that would be up to you. But at least based upon our recommendation and those objectives, we're recommending that you go from that number of 10 down to 5.
So what you're saying is based on what tier you're in, you have a different rate than somebody else?
You do. Well, it's based upon your volume, and in each billing period, that difference. So if you, for example, had 60,000 of volume, you can see your first 20,000 billed at that 281. I don't have my glasses on. Roughly up to the 30,000 at the 310, for example. So that will change if you accept the recommendations of the report. And we'll talk about timing of implementation, that there would be 5 tiers, and you can see the respective maximum volume of each tier. And we'll get into in a moment, as you heard from me in the work session, the majority of the people will see no change or a reduction. It is the higher volume users as a result of this implementation that will see increases.
I saw that. Okay, I'm glad you showed this to me. I didn't see it. Back to work last week, and that's all I did. But I need to understand how these tiers are figured out and why. And why charge somebody else differently?
Mayor,
ahead.
Councilmember Black, block rate tier structure is really focused on conservation. So if you use more of the water and the demand on the system, that you pay more. That is common across the metro area, and it's actually common across the United States as far as that block rate. The base rate is really meant to recognize that there are certain fixed costs that a utility has, a water utility, same with sanitary sewer, that you have regardless of the volume, both including staff time, billing, depreciation, all of those expenses that you cover through that base rate. And when I get to the end of the presentation, I'll have those slides that compare you to other cities as well that show their base rate versus their volume charges.
All right, thank you. That helped. Thank you.
So back to what is slide 5. So under the recommendation, there would continue to be a base rate. There would be volume billed based upon 5 tiers instead of 10, and that would be for the all billing cycles. So there would be 5 tiers every billing cycle for water. The off-season consumption rate for water would end. I'm going to jump ahead of there because we went through it, but we can come back to it if there's questions. For sanitary sewer, there's a base rate currently, a single volume charge, and there, I'll call it a winter lock, recognizing that water volumes are less in the winter because there's not irrigation and other use. Under the proposed rate structure, there would continue to be a base rate. Volume would be billed based upon 5 tiers, the same as water, those block tiers, and I'll show you those in a moment. And the volume calculated based on average winter volume, I refer to that as winter lock. That would continue, recognizing the impact of summer water use is higher. Here on the left is what you currently bill. You have one tier that you bill out at $2.55 per 1,000 gallons, and a base charge that I can't read, around $36. I could look at my paper here, but I'll keep going. Okay. And then this, under what is proposed, there would be 5 block rates, and you can see the various charges, and then there would be a base rate of $35. Rate calculation, volume by classification, certainly the council and those watching are well aware there is a lot of residential in Victoria, but you do have a healthy amount of apartments, commercial irrigation that are billed as well, and that is reflected both for water and sanitary sewer customers. And I refer to customers as anyone that receives a bill from the city for these services. The impact of the proposed rate structure, as we've been discussing, most customers with average or low volume usage will see minimal or a small reduction in their bills. It is those higher volume customers, and that is where seeking that feedback and giving that time for those customers to learn about this and to offer their input to you will be important, and we'll talk about that. Now I have 4 slides I'll move through quickly. The first one is the impact of proposed rate structure. This is for a water bill, for a winter water bill, and it varies because you may be high or low volume depending on the season. As you can see, the majority of the customers would have no change to up to $10 for that billing cycle. For a summer water bill, the majority of the customers across all classifications, and when I say classifications in Victoria, you charge customers the same whether they are residential, commercial, industrial. They all pay the same rate. So when I say most customers, that covers all classifications, would see from $0 to $5 on average per billing period for a summer water bill. The next 2 charts are for sanitary sewer. This first one is a winter sewer bill. So on average, most customers would see no change to up to a $10 reduction. And for a summer bill, again, $0 to a $10 reduction, so it reflects that as well. That's not to say there will be customers that have larger increases as shown. The next 2 slides just pick an average customer across all of your customers, so at 15,000 gallons per month, and you can see as laid out in the plan how their bill would change. Very minimal. This goes from 2018 to 2025. Same thing for sanitary sewer. Very minimal changes for that average volume customer for sanitary sewer. For water customers, this just breaks it down a little bit more in numbers, that 15% of the customers will have no change in their average quarterly bill for the year. 85% of customers will have an increase averaging approximately $6 per quarter on average for the year. There are 40 customers that will have an increase in their average quarterly water bill that is at or greater than $25 for the quarter. And of that, 12 customers would have an increase greater than $100. For sanitary sewer, of all your customers, it breaks down that 90% will see a reduction, 10% will have a quarterly average increase of $63 for the year, and 13 customers will have an increase that's greater than that average of 63, and of that, 10 would be greater than 100. And staff has those details that I provided to them on customer names. Revenues, as proposed, the amount of revenue for water and sanitary sewer that comes from that base fee versus the volume, there would not be a significant change. So for water, the city collects about a third from non-volume, and the remaining nearly 70% from those volume-based block rate charges. For sanitary sewer, about 48% comes from that non-volume basis, and the other half comes from volume basis. Sanitary sewer is different than water because you are in the metro area, so you pay disposal charges to the Met Council with respect to sanitary sewer volume flow, and the Met Council sets those rates, not the City Council. This chart is just meant to show you that in the plan that we are assuming assumptions for new or increase from residential development, so I will call those new customers, and it's based upon that amount that the city uses of 111 new customers each year. So you can see we're assuming 105,000 gallons per year for those customers. So increased volume, which means increased revenue from those base fees and those volumetric fees. Here's for sanitary sewer, same thing. The last part of my presentation focuses on comparison to the other communities. So this chart, and a little bit small because we had a lot of customers, or excuse me, other cities to compare to, which is great. You can see Victoria is at the lower end. You're not quite in, you're a little on the lower end from the middle. The green part of the bar represents the base charge, so we are showing you a comparison for a residential customer, 10,000 gallons, monthly water bill. Different cities bill differently. Some bill quarterly, bi-monthly, or monthly, but for purposes of comparison, this is stated on a monthly basis, so it's apples and apples. And you can see on the far right, Belle Plaine is the highest, and you can see their base charge is a very small portion of that. And this is for a water. For sanitary sewer, again, Victoria on the low end, and for Victoria, and this is based upon this current year published rates by these Victoria and for the comparison community, so it doesn't reflect your changes. This is comparing what is currently billable by these communities. You're about half base and half volume, and Belle Plaine is still on the high end. You can see them. Sanitary sewer different than water. That mix between base and volumetric charges is a lot different. I would also note there are some cities that you compare yourself to that are not part of the pay into the Met Council on that, so keep that in mind in that comparison. Last slide on second to last slide. Again, the focus on that revenue sufficiency, making sure that the rates that you are charging are sufficient to provide the revenue that you need to meet those objectives and that use of cash. Provide for a rate calculation that is fair and equitable. And those questions and asking and understanding of those block rates, and is that fair, and how that is those costs are being distributed amongst your customers and charging those rates. And then the last point, seeking public feedback. In the staff report for this agenda item, staff was recommending that the council consider implementing this in 2022 versus 2021. We had started this report before the COVID, and it may be more difficult to get that feedback from those customers during this environment, but that'll be up to the council to decide. And with that, here are the dates. So you did have on May 28th a review at your workshop, and then tonight's presentation. June and July, there will be that training of staff on the model. and then really to be determined based upon the council direction on timing and seeking that public input on those proposed changes. With that, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you, Tammy. We saw this before at the workshop. At this point, let me open it up for the council for questions or comments. Seeing none.
Question,
Yep, go ahead.
couple questions. You say the purpose of this, the primary purpose is to ensure that we have revenue sufficiency and all kinds of related factors. So, given that we need to do that, what is the primary result of this going to be? You say 85% of customers will have a nominal increase, and there will be a small percentage that will have a large increase. So is revenue expected to increase significantly?
Revenue is not expected to increase significantly. Revenue is expected to increase to meet those objectives, including the pay-go capital needs.
Right.
Because without the bonding, that you need to ensure that if you know you have a $2 million project coming, that you're collecting those revenues in the current years in order to ensure it's
Exactly.
available.
But is your model going to give us significant revenue increases? So we know why we have to do it, and the reasons are good. But is this going to change our revenue dynamics significantly in total?
Not in total. It'll change who's paying those
Well,
revenues.
it's an equity issue.
The change in the block rate is an equity issue. So the council could outright reject that and say, no, we want to stay with our current 10 block rate. Then there would still need to be rate increases in order to meet that revenue sufficiency. But the breakdown of who's paying that would be different than what is proposed in the rate.
So these 52 customers that are going to pay more in your current model, what is the primary reason their volumes are so much higher than usual? I mean, is there a cluster of examples you could give me? Give me 6 of these 52 customers or 10. Why is this happening?
Sure. The higher volume would be car washes that have higher
We have one car
volume.
wash.
Yep, that. The city is also included in that you bill yourself. You are a customer, so the city will be paying more. Now, that gets charged back to those other funds where that revenue comes from.
Yeah,
But the
yeah.
city, for the most part, it's due to either the car wash, you're right, the one, or irrigation. High irrigation customers are also
Who are
impacted
the
by
high
this.
irrigation customers?
I don't have the specific list. I have it, but I don't have it in front of me. I'm going to turn.
Golf course is one.
Mayor, you're correct. Mayor, members of the council, we did send a memo that has those heights. And
Okay.
I can resend that if you didn't.
Please do.
Received that last week.
The golf course has wells,
Yeah.
or it uses its own water.
So I
So
don't understand that either.
it can't be the golf course.
It's listed,
It's listed?
yeah.
Is it listed
It's
for sewer
water from
or
ponds
water or
and
both?
wells.
I was curious on why the golf
Oh.
course was included. I thought they had wells, but must be using-
They had billable volume that was charged in 2018 and 2019,
Well,
so
they must have had a
yeah.
problem of some sort.
they must have, they are being billed volume. Now, I can't speak to the specifics of that. I'm sure we can look into that, but if they're on that list, it's because they were billed in 2018 and 2019 volume.
You must have something.
Yeah, and I looked at the list as well, and I understand why we're doing this, and now that I understand it's based on conservation, and we're saying that basically they use more water, so they have to pay more, even though, and their rate is higher as well. Is that true?
They pay more because they use more, so their rate is higher. So as your volume build goes up, so does the rate that you're paying for those higher tier of volume.
Okay, so this is one tier, let's say it's $5, the next tier is $10, and it keeps going up. So if you use more water, you're gonna pay the highest tier price.
Your concept is correct. Those dollar amounts you quoted are higher than what you charge,
Right,
but the
right.
concept is correct.
Okay, so I understand the concept. I would want to kind of work with council on this, on some ideas to not just hit these businesses all at once like that. There could be, if it's based on conservation, can work with them to offer some sort of incentive so that they aren't using as much water to slow that down. I also think that we need to look at a lower rate for seniors, low-income housing, whether it's single-family or multi units.
What, like a discount?
Yeah. So that, seniors are getting beat up.
So let's,
And our businesses are hurting, so we need to really hash this out and not just jump into it, I think.
so a couple of points real quick. Dana, if the council accepts this, all we're going to do tonight is accept the plan. We're not implementing or saying we're going to do this. And the current discussion is not to implement this until 2022. So there's going to be plenty of time for input and design and discussions. The public hasn't had a chance to really weigh in. So we're not implementing this tonight. We're just going to accept the results of the survey, if you will. So we're
Right.
going to have plenty of time to seek public input and plenty of time to make any adjustments we want. So, and I think those ideas you're bringing up are great ideas that we should discuss. We can do it tonight if the council wants, or the council can go ahead and seek input from the public, and then we can have a workshop or maybe have I think probably when COVID-19 passes, maybe like we've done with roads, is we have an open house where people can come in and actually talk about it and get a chance to interact with the council there, and then bring it back at a later date to actually implement something. So I'm not opposed to the idea. It's just, do we want to do that tonight, or do we want to wait until we can get the public involved?
Well, I just wanted to make sure that we weren't just going forward with just this idea and not looking at other options, which I understand that this is just an outline, but I wanted to look at some of the other things too. Basically, you're saying that the rates are higher because it's based on conservation, and we're trying to create conservation of water. So let's give them an incentive to do that rather than just charge them extra. No, and we're talking thousands.
Thank you. Deb, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments and then a clarifying question. So my clarifying question is, they pay the rate up to the amount, right? And then everything over that amount. So whatever up to 20,000 gallons.
Is correct.
Is at this rate, up to 30,000 is at that rate. My two comments, I would say, is one of the things I think we should be cognizant of is, as we are looking to develop our land, that we don't want to make water and sewer costs prohibitive for new businesses to come in, especially if they are high water users. I know, like, for instance, food manufacturing is a big high water user, and we want to make sure that we're not making us unattractive in that way. And the other thing I would say is, I am in favor of simplifying the tier rate, and very much so waiting until 2022, until we have some time to gather some input. And
All right.
Great. I like that.
Are our rates for commercial, I heard you say earlier, are the same for residential and commercial? That strikes me as a bit unusual. Is that true? I thought commercial was always higher.
I have the stats in the report, so I'll get you the number through staff. But the majority of cities do not charge differently for different classification of property. So you are.
My assumption
I
is
just don't
wrong.
have the percentages right.
Nope,
so I
that's
will
fine.
confirm that and send an email and highlight it in the report. I think it's under the. Dana, you might find it, this section, if Dana finds it. Otherwise, I will send an email to staff.
That's fine. We'll follow up.
a comment, though, electricity rates are often charged higher at the commercial.
That may be, I always just thought
Cable and stuff.
utility rates were always higher for business, but apparently not. So, thank you. Any other?
Further comment, Mr.
Go ahead.
Mayor? Before Victoria pats itself on the back, because we're so low in the pack, is that because we have hardly any industry? And we don't have, proportionately, we haven't got a big industrial or commercial base. As a matter of fact, we know we don't. So that automatically keeps us looking like we don't consume a lot of water and don't charge a lot of water. I mean, what's the difference between Victoria and Belle Plaine? Why would one city have more than double our rates?
Mayor Council, I can't speak to Belle Plaine, but I can maybe answer your question in a different way. It depends on the infrastructure. Like there are communities like, let's pick Prior Lake, just because of their geographic. They have a lot of lift stations, so their cost of infrastructure is higher. So their rates are higher because they need to collect that revenue to support that. So really, it's not just looking at what those rates are. It's like, what are their costs related to that? And you mentioned, industrial development. Sometimes that means more infrastructure related to supporting that. Some communities have that business coming in, to your point, pay for that. Other communities will say, no, we're going to spread that over the entire customer base, or we're going to provide some non-utility revenue to support that infrastructure that needs to be put in place related to the utilities.
So if we change the rates, we wait a year or two and change the rates for 10 years again, we need to take into consideration that we're also promoting growth in Victoria, commercial growth especially. So we need to somehow make sure that the rates are not negative, but also cover our additional costs. So this model, I mean, will your study give us some sensitivities so we understand if we grow and we spread out and have lift stations and all that kind of thing, what might happen to our sewer rates, our sanitary rates?
Mayor, Councilmember, the answer is yes, that it does. And as you look at rates, I want to, and I'm sure the council's well aware of this, it's not just saying, well, we don't want our rates to go up or whatever. It's these two things. It's what do you need for total revenue, then who's going to pay that?
Support it.
Yeah. How are you going to split that amongst your customer, either classification or support? And, I had mentioned when you asked me the question on comparison, again, that decision, sometimes cities will say with infrastructure, we're going to special assess that to that development or to that industry coming in versus using our utility revenues to support that. Those are all policy decisions, but those are focused on that, ensuring that you have sufficient revenue, and then who's going to pay that?
Well,
how are you going to determine those
we
rates?
are already seeing something. I didn't hear it mentioned in this presentation. We are running into, how do I say this politically correct? In finding water, it's not as easy as we thought. And we're not going to be able to build the huge wells that we anticipated. And the huge wells are much more efficient, and you get twice the bang for the buck. So we may end up putting in more wells, so our water costs are going to go up because we can't find as much water. So, I mean, that's just one example of if you, so to me, this model, this thing, if we build it for 10 years into the future, should really pick up the fact that we have some issues to address. It's not just shifting from, shifting rates between people who are underpaying and overpaying, but we might not be picking up, we might not have the ability to pick up certain increases in costs that occur in the next 5 years, like substantially more wells when we put in a water plant. That kind of thing. What is the date we're putting in the water plant, the next one? What's the projected, Marty?
What year, Kara?
Kara?
I think it was in the plan in 2027, 2025.
Okay, so that's 5 years out. So how's that going to?
No, it's 2030.
2030, so it's 10 years out?
We have the wells, we have the anticipated wells and water treatment plant and storage built in the model to accommodate the growth we're expecting based on what we know today about our water situation.
So this will be covered in this model will be, it'll cover everything. So if we,
Everything in it that we anticipate today.
we're not going to have to do this 5 years in 5 years again because the world has changed.
If growth doesn't occur based on the rate we projected, then you wouldn't need that additional infrastructure as soon. Or if growth happens quicker, you would need that infrastructure sooner.
So it's 10 years before we have another water plant.
Did we get the results back from the latest well that was drilled? Did we find a well that's got enough flow?
You got the, last boring that was completed, we provided you an update on that. We are looking at what to do now based on the information that we have today.
Right, so I don't remember what the result was. It didn't give us the water we expected, was that correct?
So it's lower producing, so we're looking at the prospect of needing more wells
Right.
to serve the population growth that we're in.
So I think the question is this model, did it take into effect that well didn't?
Yes.
Okay, that's already been factored in.
I provided updated information to Tammy as part of this exercise within the
Got
last
it.
2 months.
Got it.
After reviewing growth projections with Marty.
All right, thank you, that's what I want to know. Go ahead.
Tammy, when we did the comparison with other cities, we're comparing one number to one number. Did you do a comparison with the different tiers of each city as well? I mean, how does our upper tier, our upper rate compare to other cities? I mean, that's what I was looking.
Mayor, Councilmember, the answer is yes. So that was based upon that assumption on that volume, and each of those communities bill out that 10,000 in volume differently. Because each community, some communities in there only have one tier for one. The other one, like you, or you're the only one with 10, but one may have 4, 5. So it ran it through. Now that was an example of a $10,000, excuse me, it's getting tired, 10,000 gallon example. If we would have used a 60,000 gallon example, those charts would look different because those different communities have different tiers for how they bill out that volume.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Council, anything else? No, if not, can I get a motion, please?
I make a motion that we accept the financial management plan for the water and sewer services with full implementation effective 2022.
Thank you, second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion, Council? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Next item, thank you, Tammy. Next item up is 6.3 Laketown 16th edition preliminary plat. Marty, this is yours. I think we have Paul of.
All right, Paul should be unmuted now.
Okay, Paul, can you hear us? You may have stepped away for a moment. We'll start with Marty, your presentation, and then we'll give Paul a chance to speak if he wishes, and then we'll go to the council.
Great.
So, go ahead, please.
Thank you.
Proceed. Oh, good. Hi, Paul.
Good evening, Mayor, everybody.
Go ahead, Marty.
All right. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Again, Marty Dahl, Community and Economic Development Director for the City of Victoria. Back before you again this evening is a preliminary plat application by Lennar Corporation for the Laketown 16th edition. I've got a presentation tonight, and as you know, Mr. Tabone from Lennar is on the line and would also like to address the council. So just as a quick refresher about what we're talking about, the Laketown 16th edition is proposed to be 25 single-family homes on a parcel that is approximately 16.63 acres, just north of Marsh Lake Road and south of Timber Terrace. So you can kind of get an idea of where that is that we are talking about. You will recall that this item was previously before you after the preliminary plat was recommended by the Planning Commission with some conditions, specifically a condition that the applicant be required to follow the explicit standards of the city's buffer and screening ordinance as it relates to the construction of a berm. During your April 27th meeting, the applicant provided some new information and contested that the full berm and buffer as required by the code was not technically feasible in the current plat. And the applicant then requested a waiver of that provision. Because of that new information, as you recall, you directed the applicant back to the Planning Commission and to work with staff to develop a solution that created a requisite berm and buffer. So on May 19th, the Planning Commission held a second public hearing and discussed the updated proposal, which I will go over with you as well in just a moment. And at their meeting, the Planning Commission determined that the proposal did not meet the PUD threshold in that it created some undesirable lot conditions, and most specifically that the full berm and buffer as required by code was essential and necessary. Their determination was that since a significantly reconfigured plat would be needed to meet the full berm and buffer requirements, it was reasonable and necessary that they recommend denial of the plat, which they did by a 7-0 vote. So, as I mentioned earlier, the applicant has indicated that a full berm on this currently proposed plat, built to the specific code standards, creates several issues, including a need to dramatically increase site grades and bring in additional fill, creating sewer depths that are much deeper than city standards allow, and likely requiring the elimination of 11, most if not all of the 11 southerlymost lots along the plat. City engineering and staff review has also concluded similar findings, and staff agrees that the applicant will likely need to completely reconfigure the proposed plat to get a full berm to fit. So the slide that you're seeing now is the close-up view of that cross-section that was presented to you from the developer on April 27th. It shows the impact of that 3-to-1 sloped berm, 8-foot berm on the current plat as it's currently designed. It's also important to note on this cross-section that was provided a month or so ago is that the berm is being shown starting right on the edge of the roadway, which would not be permitted. It wouldn't be allowed to start there. So if that were to move even farther inward away from the right-of-way, that makes those conditions worse. So this is the situation we were looking at with the current proposed plat, with trying to get a full berm to the explicit standards of the ordinance. So as directed by the council, staff and the applicant worked to try to come up with some sort of potential compromise solution that would meet the intent, purpose, and visual screening of the city's berm requirement. That updated proposal from the applicant includes a berm of varying height from 4 to 8 feet along the property and along Marsh Lake Road, with a staff intended a requirement that it would screen homes up to the roof line across that entire stretch. So depending on the elevations along the roadway, that berm would need to vary to screen up to that roof line. It also included a 2-to-1 slope up and down berm, which ended in a 6-foot retaining wall on the property side, and I'll have a close-up view of that cross-section in just a second. And while the city's standard slope on a berm is 3-to-1, we have allowed 2-to-1 slopes on berms in other developments. In those cases, they're typically planted with native grasses and vegetation instead of turf grass to reduce the mowing and maintenance that's needed on those steeper slopes. This proposal also included some mechanical drainage, some storm drains and piping in the rear yards to be able to provide for stormwater drainage. And then it also included about 20 to 25 feet of backyard space, but with a relatively large drainage and utility easement needed to manage that rear yard mechanical drainage. So here is a closer up view of that cross section, which was also provided in your report, where you can see that 2-to-1 slope coming up and coming back down, ending in that 6-foot retaining wall. You can see the storm and swale, the drainage and utility easement there, and then what the remainder of that yard would look like from a cross-section view. This is a cross-section view of Lot 3. So as you'll recall, they went from west to east, Lot 1 through 11. So this is farther west, where the conditions would allow in this configuration a little bit larger yard. And then as you continue to the east, this is Lot 8, which, sorry, did I have that backwards? I think I had that backwards. In Lot the east, where that condition changes a little bit, you'll see the berm is shorter here because the house would be lower in the ground. So you can kind of see between the two what we are talking about with that berm varying in height as it goes along that roadway, but trying to maintain that screening to the road.
It looks like that berm in Lot 3 is outside the right-of-way from Marsh Lake Road, and in Lot 8, the berm is back inside the right-of-way.
Yeah, so we've got this, I was going to address that in my presentation as well, but since we brought it up, we did talk to the applicant, and engineering staff agreed that the foot or the start of that berm could extend out as far as 15 feet into the right-of-way in this situation, because as you'll recall, there's more right-of-way dedicated than what is currently needed with the updated Marsh Lake Road information. So it went from needing 150 feet of width to 120 feet of width going forward, and that's due to that no longer being a 4-lane road, correct? So going from a 4-lane to 2-lane road. So from that standpoint, staff believe that it would be acceptable in this scenario, that that berm could start at least 15 feet out into the roadway to build up, because it wouldn't impact the future expansion of that road width. It would still retain the 120 feet required for the road and the trails.
So the trail's still,
Yep.
they're still, all right,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Say, Marty, as long as you're on this slide, it appears to me that in order to put these backyards in, you have to remove at least 20 feet of grade to get down to that backyard. Is that right?
No, so we are the existing grade. Yeah, so you would have to remove some fill in those areas. So you
and the
kind of see the
reason that-
line with the existing grade there.
Yeah, so we're taking 20 feet out, and that's the reason that it's so hard to get that berm in there, so. And the reason you have to take out 20 feet of grade is why? Because of the sewer
A
system?
lot of it has to do with the sewer depth. So when you're not taking that grade out, those sewers get extremely deep, which makes future maintenance. If you need to dig down, what does it carry? You need 2 feet wide for every foot deep. So that's how much farther width you would need to dig out if you ever needed to dig in, and then you're digging into properties and things if those get too deep.
So how much backyard would they actually have that they could use?
Yeah, so in this cross-section of 8, you're talking about 16.2 feet out from the building line, and then an additional 20 feet of storm and swale. So those drainage and utility easement areas are usable areas. We do not allow structures to be built, so you couldn't build a shed in there. That is one of the conditions that we discussed, and I'll get to in a minute, is that we try to tell people not to put anything in the easement, but there are people that put play sets and fire pits and those types of things that we address as they come up. And it's likely in that situation, because much of the yard is utility and easement, you'd see that, you'd see play sets. We'd try to not allow building sheds and that sort of thing in there, but you'd see some encroachment in there, would be likely, and it would be difficult to enforce because you'd have most of your yard as drainage and utility easement.
So Marty, how many units would they build using this scenario?
So this would retain the full 25, the 11 on the south side, and then the additional 14 north and around the curve.
All right, you have more? Go ahead.
Yeah, just about done here. So we talked a little bit about those conditions. So staff did report to the Planning Commission that we thought this could be a reasonably, professionally reasonable compromise. However, it did create some conditions that we wanted the Planning Commission to discuss and weigh in on, the council to discuss and weigh in on. And we've talked a little bit about those already. But one we haven't touched on is the creation of that rear yard retaining wall. That is something that, at least from a staff perspective, we do try to avoid retaining walls whenever possible. In fact, that was the initial direction given to the applicant way back when we first started talking about the 16th, was to try to grade out retaining walls, just because they eventually become somebody's responsibility. The city doesn't necessarily want to keep those and maintain those when they break or when they need to be rebuilt. And in this situation, they would then become the responsibility of either an HOA that's created or those homeowners in the future. So that is something to consider, that we'd be creating that condition of those walls that would become a private responsibility.
What kind of builder warranty comes with those retaining walls?
I believe there are some documentation that notes that it's the buyer's responsibility within the HOA docs or the covenants that are provided. So and the city would require in this situation some sort of agreement and part of those documents that indicated to any buyer of those lots that that's their responsibility, or if it's an HOA, again, the HOA's responsibility.
So there's no warranty that comes with these?
Oh, warranty, that would likely be up to the builder or the developer. Paul could probably speak to that more once he jumps in.
All right, thank you.
We talked about the rear yard space. It does reduce some of the rear yard space from the very initial proposal, about 10 to 15 feet, and you've got that large drainage and utility easement. And we talked about some of the encroachment things of items, play sets, fire pits that would likely happen and be hard to enforce. As we reviewed this with the Planning Commission, staff also highlighted the fact that the foot of the berm would begin within that public right-of-way, so we've talked about that already. We just wanted to highlight that it would start in the right-of-way for a portion of that at least. Staff also noted that further information from a full grading plan would be needed to make a determination of the suitability of lots 9 through 11. So the farthest east cross-section shows lot 8, so staff is fairly confident those conditions would be in place for lots 1 through 8. Had the Planning Commission recommended approval, one of the conditions we would have asked for is to get that grading plan to review lots 9, 10, and 11, but since they recommended denial, we did not get that additional information, but that was something else that staff would want to weigh in on in a situation where this proposal was accepted. And then we also noted that we'd need to do some additional work with the applicant on storm drainage, stormwater management, and water drainage with that wall. So ultimately, the Planning Commission looked at all of these conditions. They looked at the berm requirements, and they determined that the combination of all these factors highlighted by the lack of the full berm created a situation that they could not recommend approval. So my last slide here before I turn it over for discussion, essentially staff reviewed 3 different scenarios over the past several months with these this preliminary plat. The first scenario 1 being the condition that was put in place the first meeting with the Planning Commission on approval, that the full berm and buffer requirements be met. And as we've talked about in meetings and with the applicant, it is just not technically possible to get a full berm and buffer in it in the way it is platted. So that's the scenario that the Planning Commission used for their recommendation for denial. The second scenario is the very first original applicant proposal, which did not include a berm. It was more of a hill coming down from the roadway. This did create better yard situations, more usable yard area, flat yard area, but of course it sacrificed the level of buffer that we have that would be provided by a berm, and that was the Planning Commission's initial impetus in putting that condition on. And then the third being this current applicant proposal, which creates a portion of a berm with some retaining wall that, again, I think staff believes would be professionally reasonable, but does create some conditions for you all to discuss and talk about and determine what you think is best. And with that, I will conclude my presentation, and just as a reminder, we do have Paul Tabone on the line.
All right, thank you, Marty. Paul, are you still there?
Yes, Mayor, I'm still here.
Paul, the floor is yours. If you would, for the record, name and position again, please.
Sure. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. Paul Tabone with Lennar, and I'm an entitlement manager. So you all can hear me okay?
Yep.
Great. Okay, I would first like to start by saying thank you to staff and thanks to the council for reconsidering this item tonight. There's just a couple things that I'd like to point out before the council gets to its discussion and ultimately a vote. And I'll try to keep it as brief as I can. But I think probably the most important question to address is, how did we get here? And Marty did a really nice job summing that up. Going back a little bit further, we have gone through every phase of Laketown with the PUD because the 2004 master plan was never set up to follow any conventional zoning. Even back from the time when the properties were part of Laketown Township. And so thinking back a little bit more, how did we get here? Typically, you would do a preliminary plat at the beginning of an entire community. But we didn't really have that option at the time because, as you all know, this community is pretty old, been around a while. And so ultimate build-out at the time was very heavily dependent upon sewer and water service for all the properties, which didn't actually become available to the southern 2/3 of the community until 2015. So that actually incorporates Laketown 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, and 15th. And so we wanted to, make sure that we could continue to move forward as intended. So in 2015, we worked through a PUD sketch plat with the city. Since that time, we've been navigating our way through the remainder of the community with PUDs to meet the spirit and intent of the original master plan and the 2015 sketch plan. So we've worked with staff to connect utility trunk extensions from Wasserman Lake Woods. We updated the Southwest AUAR for this area. We worked with MCWD on an award-winning wetland restoration project to essentially unlock the remainder of the property and have it ready to bring Laketown back online. So here we are, it's kind of our last phase. Now, I don't doubt I'll say, since I've been involved, there's been many modifications to community layout, including the redesign of home sites, road connections, utilities, and stormwater infrastructure. Parks and open space and trail dedication requirements have been met and exceeded. And I think probably the most important thing to note is that, and I really want to reiterate this, is that we're not trying to be difficult and we're not trying to adhere to the berming requirement because we just don't want to. As Marty has pointed out, and as we have found by working through multiple scenarios with staff, the berm is not really feasible from an engineering standpoint to implement the code to the fullest extent. So we've come up with what we believe is a pretty reasonable compromise. And we would request, and I'm asking for the support of this so that we can finish up the final piece, I guess, of Laketown that's still under current ownership by Lennar. We submitted this application in December of 19, and we've worked with staff pretty closely, pretty well, I think, to get to this point. And it would really be our preference to not have to start all over and completely redo all of the planning and engineering that's occurred for this challenging, extremely challenging piece of property over the past 6 months. So I will stand for any questions, but I think Marty did a great job summing it up, and we have been working closely with staff, and hopefully we can utilize the flexibility that comes with a PUD, because one of the challenges has been trying to respond to ever-changing ordinance requirements and standards, as well as ever-changing city officials and personnel. As I said, it's been a long time that we've tried to build this out. So I'll go ahead and wrap it up. That's my piece, but I am available for any questions you might have, and hopefully we can move it forward and wrap Laketown up. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Paul. With that, let's move to council discussion. Council, questions, comments for Marty or Paul?
Marty, under 33.7, they allow for fencing, is that correct? And have we explored the idea of fencing along with shrubbery, trees, evergreens?
Yeah, Councilmember Gregory, members of the council, that was one of the original discussions back in the first planning commission meeting, and I believe we talked about it briefly when this was before the council, that 33.7 does allow for fencing and shrubbery, and that is essentially the original proposal that Lennar had brought forward, was to use a combination of some tall shrubs, and they had also offered up the ability to put fencing along there. We went away from that based on the direction of the council in the last meeting to try and find a way to make a berm work, to actually get an earthen berm. But you're correct, it does allow for that type of screen and buffering in those situations when 33.7 is invoked and 33.6 can't be adhered to.
I mean, I can certainly sympathize with them. A berm simply isn't going to work, and if there's any way possible, I think it would have to include fencing and shrubbery. But I just didn't see that had a lot of. There wasn't a lot of discussion about it. Maybe it got wiped out from the get-go. I mean, when we first heard it, there was some talk about sending it back to planning based on 33.7, but we kind of let the planning commission have free rein and decide what they wanted to do. And I'm surprised that when that went back before planning, that 33.7 didn't seem to have any traction at all with planning.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. I think the planning commission deems the berm necessary and important for the screening and buffering, and in their finding of fact didn't believe that 33.7 would apply.
Other questions? Paul, two questions for you. Would you be willing to offer a warranty for the retaining walls?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I would have to see what types of industry standard warranties come with those. I do know that so to let you know, it would be a boulder wall, and we do have it structurally engineered. We do have 2 or 3 outfits that we use. I don't know what their warranty information is like, but I could certainly research that and provide that to staff. would be willing to figure out what policies and procedures are in place regarding a warranty for the wall, yes.
All right, 6 foot is far less dangerous to the homeowners, and what I mean by dangerous is unexpected large bills if the retaining wall fails. If it was 10 or 12 or higher, like some of the initial discussions, that could really be a hit to the homeowners. But 6 feet, if we can get a reasonable warranty, I think we manage the risk. Marty, do we typically, is this typically assigned to an HOA? Is it different by neighborhood?
Yeah,
Who takes over responsibility?
I think it can vary, right? I think there's some flexibility there. I think probably the best way to handle a situation like this would be if there was an HOA created that had some sort of maintenance fund for those things, so that if an issue happened, it wasn't necessarily, it's because this would be a continuous wall along the way instead of picking and choosing whose portion of wall came down. That probably is the cleanest way to do it. But I think there is some flexibility, and it's something that we could discuss with the applicant and determine what we'd want to include in a developer's agreement on how that would be managed and maintained.
Okay, thank you. The other question I have is, I'm okay, I think, because if we've got a 4-foot berm, we meet the spirit and the intent. But I have questions about the plantings. I mean, some of them are going to die. Are they dense enough to really screen the property? Hence, getting back to Councilmember Gregory's point, if we put a fence up, we don't have to wait for plants to grow and the fence doesn't die. So it's going to be there. What I'm not sure of, because the topography changes here between the lots, would that fence have to go from end to end? I mean, we don't want just a single fence sitting there by itself. It's kind of odd. So how do we make this aesthetic? And I'd like to hear your thought on, is it better to go with density of plantings, or is it better to go with a combination of that, a fence? So your thoughts?
The fencing has some pros and cons. Again, you've got a maintenance issue with the fence. Those cedar split rail fences look nice for a few years. And
let me stop you there. When I'm thinking fencing, if we can't get an 8-foot berm, I'm thinking fencing that's solid so that it blocks the house, right?
Yeah.
And so when I'm talking about density of planting, same concept. I want to be able to screen the house from the road. So split rail fence isn't going to do that.
It definitely changes the aesthetic, right? If you were to do a solid fence, almost a sound wall-esque type fence along there, it definitely changes the aesthetic of what that corridor looks like versus heavy and dense planting. If you were asking for my personal opinion, I would say I probably prefer dense vegetation, trees, natural screening versus a solid fence. But again, that would be my personal opinion.
So to kind of close this point out, at least for me, I would tend to agree with you because it would kind of flow with the rest along Marsh Lake Road. Do we have any guidelines or anything to make sure that we have enough density so that we actually do get a visual screen?
Yeah, and that would be part of our continued discussion. So we did not have an updated landscaping plan based on this design. That would be something that would need to be included. I believe in the original landscaping plan, there was a proposal for very heavy, thick, some coniferous trees. The problem was that in order to keep them on the private property side, they were so far down the hill on the property side that they didn't do much for screening because they wouldn't grow taller than the top of the roadway. So I can maybe let Paul speak to that as well as to what they would propose, but they did have a fairly large and thick buffer on the original landscaping plan that would need to be adjusted to fit with this new design.
Paul, do you want to speak to that briefly?
Yeah, I can elaborate on that a little bit. So we have a 30-foot wide landscape buffer, and originally we had showed 2 rows of coniferous trees. In the, as we were kind of working through this over the past month or so, I did call my landscaper and asked, could we do more in there? Because I believe, Marty, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the plan is short trees anyway. We were going to have to add some more.
Correct.
In the overall preliminary plat area. So my thought was maybe we put those trees right into the buffer area. And so what my landscaper had kind of communicated to me was maybe we could, put the coniferous trees where they're adequately spaced, of course, for full mature growth, but maybe do some accenting with aspens on the outside or on the Marsh Lake roadside. And that would kind of deliver a nice seasonal pop of color but then through the wintertime, you would have that really thick hedge, you know, two canopies wide, if you will, or 2 drip lines wide of coniferous trees. So we can definitely continue to work with staff and, you know, finalize a landscaping plan that'll work, and maybe you know, beef it up a little bit along Marsh Lake Road, so that you do get that natural screen that the city is looking for. So I think that's something that we could definitely do.
All right, thank you, council. Other further comments, questions?
Well, I listened to the Planning Commission when they were talking with Paul, and I agree that a full berm, as we require in our ordinance, is necessary for this development. I hope that Lennar will consider resubmitting a preliminary plat in the near future to meet these requirements. I looked at all the things that everyone's trying to do to allow that many homes in that amount of space, and to have that boulder wall and only have really technically 16 feet of backyard, because the rest of it is going to be drainage or whatever.
Easement.
Easement. It's like, I appreciate what Lennar has done for the community for the past 15 years, and I recognize everything has been done for the community in previous developments. I just think that I have concerns, and I believe that we're creating a subpart lot conditions with significant retaining walls and small usable yard space. I think they need to make something that fits that, instead of trying to smoosh everything around until they can get as many houses in there as they want.
All right, thank you, council. Deb?
Do you have something to read from a resident on this?
That's 6.5.
Oh, sorry.
Different item. No, that's all right.
There was, the public feedback that was provided at the public hearing was included in your background packet, so you should have that information.
Yeah, this is complicated. This is complicated. I wish it were more straightforward, and again, I echo Judy's sentiments in thanking Lennar for their durability on this project, because it's been around for a long time, and we're trying to figure out what would work best. And you know, when you're buying a lot and you're paying that kind of money, and you're worried about what the backyard looks like, and is the boulder wall going to hold up, and who's responsible? I think there's a lot of questions and a lot of things that need to be worked out, and I'm uncomfortable.
Okay, thank you.
One more question. real
Yep,
quick.
go ahead.
Marty, as you go east, okay, outside of this development, as we go further east on Marsh Lake Road, we're going to have this same scenario over and over again. The ghost plats that are put in, it appears that all these homes are lined up about the same distance from Marsh Lake Road.
Yeah, the conditions continue to get more difficult as you go east with the grades and the drop in elevation. So it is something that's going to have to be addressed with each one of those properties as they continue to develop to the east, but it is a challenge.
Couple comments.
Go ahead.
First of all, you're saying, I agree, that this is going to get worse as we go east, or go west.
East.
East?
As you continue
Toward the
east.
farm?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, toward Schmieg's land.
Yes, yeah, the conditions continue to get more challenging along the
So
roadway.
there's going to be a precedent here. Whatever we establish is going to be a baseline. That'll be, everybody will say, why can't we do this, or why can't we do that? So it is important to get this right, and maybe that's one of the reasons the Planning Commission was adamant about this, is because they understand this is going to be a baseline. However, in looking at this, and I understand how complicated this is, scenario 3 appeals to me, except you'd have to solve, I agree with the mayor, the biggest thing is to give people comfort in the long-term outlook on the retaining wall, the rock wall, the 6-foot wall. Those things are expensive, and one of the things that there'd have to be some kind of long-term warranty, but the other thing would have to be, we as a city would have to understand what the cost of that retaining wall is. So if it's even possible to work a depreciation schedule that would be put into a homeowners association spreadsheet to understand how much they could charge these homeowners to even reasonably get money in a fund to cover them. So, it might be that that wall is so expensive that they'd have to charge dues to these homeowners just for that wall that nobody would pay. And therefore, they wouldn't sell the houses. So, to me, if scenario 3 is going to be pursued, the retaining wall has to be really understood, the total cost, and how would a homeowners association even work out the economics to charge the homeowners over a 30-year period. And the second thing is that the trees, Paul hit on it, it needs a lot of trees, and it should be conifers, because you want the coverage in the winter. So that's going to add to the cost for the builder, for the developer. So I think there's possibilities with scenario 3, but the retaining wall has to be worked out. A lot of people today that are buying houses live with these small backyards and they don't care. But I think the retaining wall could be a killer. So, and the fact that, this is a baseline and we want to be really careful what we come up with, because it'll be applied going for the rest of the development on Marsh Lake Road.
I agree. The warranty is, in my mind, is to protect the future Victoria residents from that unexpected burden. I like the idea of the HOA taking it and charging as such. But whether people, and there are a lot of people that don't want a big backyard, they don't want to mow the grass. They would prefer less is more for them. At the end of the day, that I don't know if that's really our concern. We clearly don't want homes that don't sell, but I can't believe that Lennar would propose this if they don't think they can sell the product. I think we're as we move east, and Marty, from what I'm hearing you say, if we set this precedent for this section of the road where we're still meeting the spirit and the intent of what we want for the screening from Marsh Lake Road from the homes, and at least, even if it's not an 8-foot berm, a 4-foot berm, but yet we still have the screening, I think we're doing the right thing for the city, and we'll have that same look and feel all the way down Marsh Lake Road in the future. So I think that we should actually go ahead and approve this, but we do need clarity, we do need agreement that warranty is going to be there to protect the homeowners from some unexpected costs. So what kind of options do we have as a council? I mean, we can put the condition on it that an appropriate warranty is, but I don't know what is appropriate. To me, I'm kind of thinking, I've heard before builders' warranties of 10 years, that it won't fail, at least materially, for 10 years. But I can't imagine, there's not a lot of maintenance unless it's not installed correctly. If it's not installed correctly, it'll fail within the 10 years is my assumption. Is that a valid assumption?
Yeah, well, of course, Mayor, members of the council, if something is not constructed properly, it's going to be more likely to fail sooner rather than later. Speaking to the cost of what that entire wall would be, or the likelihood, I'd be guessing right now. So I mean, that'd be something that we would need to do some more work on. If it is something the council's considering is approving this with some of these conditions, I'd maybe defer to Bob to help figure out what a good condition would be to add to that list of conditions to give us that protection to be able to continue to work with the applicant to determine what the appropriate warranty and requirement would be related to that.
And Bob, jump in here if this is wrong, but to remind the council, we need to make a decision tonight because there's statutory requirements to either approve or deny this. So given the fact that we don't have those details on the warranty, we could say approved, if you will, hypothetically here. I don't want to speak for the council, but if we were to approve this with a condition of, okay, this warranty, we need a 10 years builder warranty, that would be fine, and then the builder could decide either to move forward or not with that condition. Is that accurate?
Yeah, so Mayor and Council, I think staff took the unusual step of bringing forward both a resolution denying and approving tonight, just to be ready, because you do have to take action tonight. And in the resolution approving, Marty will correct me on this, but I think there is a provision, I don't have it in front of me, but a provision that addresses this question of what's going to happen with the retaining wall, in so many words. And I think that provision, that condition in that proposed resolution speaks to the developer, in effect, making a proposal to you as part of its final plat request. That is to say, you'd approve it tonight with a condition that says you will satisfy the city council before the city council will give you final plat approval. And you will do that by, and I think it spells out, one being making the homeowners association responsible and giving documents that I would review as your attorney. But I think that is intended to be open-ended in terms of developer should propose what developer thinks will sell to the council, and the council can push back on that as we move forward.
So the current line that is in that draft resolution is the applicant shall address the ongoing maintenance of all retaining walls within the property to the city's satisfaction and approval, and provide the city with copies of all homeowners association covenants for this development, which are subject to review and approval of the city attorney. So that's the current condition that is in the draft resolution right now. So it doesn't necessarily speak specifically to X amount of years warranty, but it does, I believe, and Bob, as Bob said, gives us the ability to say that it needs to meet city's approval to be
Okay, and we could incorporate, that resolution is valid so that we can incorporate the comment council member vote made in the sense of making sure that the HOA covenants protect the homeowners, that there's, that's all part of the deal, if you will?
Yeah, Mayor, I think procedurally what you would do if that would win a majority of the council members' votes, you would make a motion to amend that provision in the proposed resolution to add explicit language about a warranty. If that passed, then you'd have a motion on the resolution as amended. So, but I think you would actually want to go through those steps since we are having to act here tonight.
Got it, thank you. Go ahead, Judy.
So are you suggesting that we go against planning commission's recommendation?
Yes, I am. Council?
Under scenario 3, you indicate that it meets the intent of the berming requirements. Are you saying that we're going to get an 8-foot berm, but it's only 2-to-1 as opposed to 3-to-1?
No, I think where staff's perception that it's meeting the intent is that it is screening homes up to the roof line. You know, that really when you're looking for screening from a roadway like that, you want to have not only screening from those folks that are in their yard looking out to the road so they can't see the cars, but also so that the cars can't necessarily see down into those backyards. So I think staff's perspective on the intent is that even if it's not 8 feet tall, there are conditions because those homes sit so far down below grade, below the roadway, that you don't necessarily need an 8-foot berm to reach that screening where a vehicle is going to look off to the side and they're only going to see the top of the roof line.
And you felt you couldn't meet that intent under that first proposal, which was scenario 2?
The first proposal, it would have had to have been done with all vegetation screening or a fence.
I thought that was between a 4 and 8-foot berm, or is that just scenario 3?
What's that? Sorry.
I thought that was between a 4 and 8-foot berm.
No, scenario 3 will have a varying berm in that situation. You can actually kind of see it in the cross section between 3 and 8, that I believe it was 8 that berm only would need to get 4 feet high to be able to screen to the roof line. As you go farther west, that berm might need to be a little higher because those homes sit up a little bit higher. So it's using the drop in elevation where the homes are sitting to the advantage of being able to not necessarily need an 8-foot berm to meet that intent of the screening.
Marty?
Yes.
Can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, go ahead, Paul.
So yeah, Marty pretty much nailed it right on the head. Our original proposal, due to the fact that staff had indicated that no walls were wanted for the exact reasons we're talking about right now, based on previous interactions with staff last year, in the last 18 months or so, the screening was kind of talked about on the backside of the berm. I ran into this in Laketown 15th edition when we were working on the townhome area. And so the thought was that we could utilize the downslope without a retaining wall as kind of the backside of a berm and then heavily landscape that downslope I think that's scenario 2, Marty, if I'm not mistaken, which is just our original proposal from December. And the idea was that we would landscape that slope, and you get about, I think, 5, maybe 8 feet more of usable backyard space. But there is no actual physical rise away from Marsh Lake Road and then an actual berm coming down. The idea was to use that slope in the original proposal, which we wouldn't mind doing that either if it puts the council at ease, because 33.7 does talk about the ability to use enhanced screening and a fence. So we're comfortable with 2 or 3. We can make 3 work, but appreciate the dialogue and trying to figure out how we can move this forward.
Okay. Council, further thoughts, comments? All right, can we get the resolution up?
Yeah, I don't know if we have it on this slide,
Oh,
sorry.
oh. The,
I make a motion that we approve the preliminary plat of Laketown 16th edition submitted by Lennar with the condition that the warranty get worked out.
can I have a second, please?
I think we should be more specific on the wording. Instead
I-
of just calling it a warranty, we should call it the warranty or related to the berm or to the retaining wall.
And Mayor, members of the council, we do have in that draft resolution, there are a number of other conditions that I'm happy to either go through. They were in your background packet, or staff recommended conditions if you were to approve.
So hold a second. Bob, based on the discussion of the council tonight, was Councilmember McMillan's motion sufficient enough for you to work the intent of the council in our discussions? Or I hate to try to do these modifications on the fly.
Yep.
Would you have a suggestion for how we do that motion?
Well, I had suggested when I spoke a minute ago that you actually, if we could all be looking at it, I guess I'm not sure if we can all be looking at the resolution.
Right, can we
but that
get the
actually
resolution
make a
up on the
motion
screen,
to
please?
amend the resolution. Again, not trying to direct the will of the majority here, but if the majority wants to move forward, a motion to amend, I guess it's condition number 5.
Bob, let me ask you to hold for a second. Because of the COVID, we got to switch computers around here.
And we want the second resolution?
Yes.
And the conditions are on the second page.
Okay, is this a,
These are all the conditions.
okay, Bob, go ahead.
So what I was saying was number 5, condition number 5 appears to be the one that addresses the retaining walls. I guess if I were the maker of the motion, I would want to amend that to say something like applicant shall address the ongoing maintenance of all retaining walls within the property to the city's satisfaction and approval, comma, which shall include the provision of a fill-in-the-blank guarantee. I don't know if you want to say industry standard, 5-year, 10-year, I'm not sure where the will of the majority is on that, but so language to that effect, comma, and provide the city with copies of, et cetera.
Hold that. Councilmember McMillan, will you?
I accept that friendly amendment.
Thank you. I'll second that. With the suggestion that we go with what is considered leading practices or industry best practices defined with our staff. Are you okay with that?
Yes.
Okay. I believe we have a valid motion with an amended motion. Council, is there any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the amended motion signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed signify by saying nay.
No.
All right, so motion carries 3-2. I think Councilmember Black, nay. Councilmember Gregory, nay. Is that accurate? Okay, so the motion carries 3-2. That's all we needed on the motion?
Correct.
Okay.
Mayor,
Thank you.
not to belabor the point, so I had contemplated 2 motions, but I understood that then Councilmember Black, your motion was to make that amendment and to approve the resolution. Is that what just occurred?
Yes, sir.
Got it.
I agree. Councilmember Vogt, was that your intention also?
Yes.
Okay, the 3 of us that voted aye, that was our intention. That wraps up item 6.3.
Thanks.
Next item, 6.4. Kara, this is yours. Approval of a resolution of support for Carver County's federal funding application for Highway 5 Arboretum area mobility and access improvement between Rolling Acres Road and Minnewashta Parkway.
Thanks. I was gonna get with you next. Maybe that one, well, she doesn't need to talk. Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Pleasant to be here in person versus on my computer. This agenda item originally had been contemplated as a consent item because we had previously discussed and the council had provided feedback that the council was supportive of the county submitting this application. But since the time that we last spoke about it, the opportunity to include a pedestrian underpass in the application came up, so we wanted to at least take a couple of minutes to highlight that both for the council and the public. What we're looking for tonight would be approval of a resolution of support for Carver County to submit for federal funding for Highway 5 for improvements between Rolling Acres Road and Minnewashta Parkway primarily. These layouts were shown in your packet, but the specific improvements, the limits of construction do start at Park Drive, Cochia. That's the area that they would need to start in order to transition into the 4-lane. But the improvements include construction of a 4-lane Highway 5 from that location all the way to the intersection of Minnewashta Parkway. The tie-in point where the 4-lane would come to an end would be in the area between the wetlands. So the part of the scope of projects that we've talked about previously in this area where that potentially would need to be a land bridge over that section of Highway 5, which is expensive. So as part of the application, really kind of simultaneously to this being worked on, the Technical Advisory Committee has been working on possible locations for pedestrian crossings of Highway 5. There's a number under consideration along the whole length of the corridor. And the Park and Rec Committee did review that in much greater detail on at their May 18th Park and Rec Committee meeting. But we have an opportunity here with this application because it's being applied for federal funding. There'd be an opportunity for federal funding to be applied to this pedestrian underpass based on the way points are allocated through that process. So the Technical Advisory Committee thought that it would be advantageous to include this one and that it would have the potential to receive federal funds. The overall project for the whole, what you see on those plans has an estimated total cost of about $13.4 million. That includes $2 million for the underpass. If the project was successful in becoming funded, the funding would be available for fiscal year 2024 and 2025. The city would potentially have a cost share associated with that underpass. Detailed estimates aren't available yet because we haven't done any design work. And part of what the county will have to work through on this project is with the gas tax money, the intent of the county is that they'll get the outside federal funding first, they'll see what state funding could be brought to a project, and then take a look at how the gas tax funding could be applied to the project. So it's a little bit premature to know what the city's specific risk might be, but the team did identify that it could be up to $500,000. And this was in the staff report, but I want to highlight it here. Given the funding needs for all the corridors included in the project area, so Rolling Acres Road, Highway 5 from 41 all the way to Dairy Queen, and then also 82nd Street behind the Arboretum. Federal funding will be needed in order to complete all the improvements on the corridor. The study team identified this particular project as both a priority, given the concerns and crash history associated with the intersection of Rolling Acres Road and Highway 5, but also taking a look at the potential to obtain federal funds based on funding scoring criteria. So the county team has developed a certain level of expertise where they're looking at all of these projects in the county and making a determination about which ones make the most sense to submit for which pots of money. You know, we've had representative on the Transportation Advisory Board and the Technical Advisory Committee that administers this funding. So I've been pretty impressed by their depth of knowledge. But so their recommendation was to submit for this. So the funding application actually has already been submitted. Because of COVID, we were given an extension in terms of the time frame that letters of support could be submitted. Because this is a project within the city limits, the county did request a resolution of support because it carries a bit more weight than a simple letter. And so staff is recommending that the council approve the resolution of support that is included in your packet.
Thank you. To me, this is a no-brainer, but council discussion? Can I get?
5,000 is a lot of money, but boy, is an underpass there is, it's almost, you have to have it. You just have to have it.
Yeah, the Park and Rec, and I believe you were at the Park and Rec Committee, but from what Ann told me, the Park and Rec Committee noted that one of the #1 requests they get is for safe crossings of Highway 5, and they liked this location with the proximity to the park and the regional trail system.
Yep.
And that's not to say that we're going to need to continue to pursue other potential crossing locations that you'll see as the west side of the study comes forward. Staff sees this as a both, not an either or. So that, you know, if we can get federal funding to help pay for one, then that'll help us be in a better financial position down the road to fund an additional crossing improvements.
Perfect, thank you. Council, can I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to provide the resolution of support for Carver County's federal funding application for Highway 5 Arboretum area mobility and access improvement between Rolling Acres Road and Minnewashta Parkway.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, Kara. Next item, 6.5, potential sale of vacant city-owned lots. Marty, this is you, but before we begin, let me read the one comment we got from a resident. This was sent in this afternoon. It's from Richard Schaefer. He lives at 8050 81st Street. And before I read his comments, are you pulling up the actual lot that he's referring to?
Yes.
So the council can see?
Pull that one up. Just get it on the slide here.
As Marty's pulling that up, I'm going to go ahead and read the comments. He wrote, and I quote, regarding the possible sale of city-owned parcel at 81st Street in Trillium, downtown Victoria is changing fairly rapidly. The population density has increased significantly recently and will continue to do so in the future. Old townhomes are being converted to commercial use and others are being sold and removed for new development. But the availability of publicly owned green space close to downtown is limited and can't very easily be increased. This piece of green space contains mature hardwood trees and is adjacent to Church Lake, one of the two lakes within easy walking distance of downtown. Is the relatively small amount of money that the city would receive from the sale and future taxes really worth permanently giving up this open space? Once it is sold, that area of green space so close to downtown would be lost forever. There are numerous residential lots available within new, well-planned developments in Victoria. I urge the council to not give up this very nice little public green space just to provide one lot, which, because it is not well planned originally, would front on a paved alley. The current cost to the city to maintain this property is likely very low. The city mowers drive by it anyway, and it probably takes them about a minute to mow the grass portion of the lot. Anyway, that was the comment. With that, Marty, go ahead.
Great. Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. I'm Marty Dahl, Community and Economic Development Director. I'm back before you again this evening to, as you know, to continue discussing the potential sale of 4 city-owned lots. I have a presentation that answers some of the questions that arose during your May 11th workshop, and then we've also solicited some public feedback that we will summarize and go over, and was also included in its entirety in your background packet. As I go through the presentation, we can either pause for discussion after we go through each property, or we can, I can go through all 4 properties and you can discuss at the end, whichever is your prerogative as we go through.
Council, as he goes through, just jump in after he finishes with each property if you so choose. Go ahead.
So as you'll recall, during the May 11th workshop, you had directed staff to collect some feedback from neighboring property owners on these potential sales of these, on the potential sale of these lots. And then we also had some questions, and we're looking for some additional information on some of these properties. So from the public feedback side of things, staff set up a very short 4-question SurveyMonkey survey asking folks which property was near their home, which, if they had any concerns, if the city were to sell that property, if so, what are those concerns, and if so, what suggestions would you have to do with it other than sell? So just as a, we'll go over the individual feedback for each property, but in its totality, that ended up being 88 letters that were sent, and we did receive 16 responses to that survey, which was sent out on May 14th. So with that, we'll jump into the properties, and as I said, I've got a little bit of information on each one. The first, as you'll recall, is 6370 Maple Drive, and much of our discussion on May 11th was centered around the land trust lot program for which this lot was part of. We had some questions about do we have any restrictions on that lot because it is part of that program, and really what does that mean? So staff was able to reach out to Carver County CDA, and as well as we had the city attorney do a little bit of review and research on this topic. And just as a refresher from our last meeting, the land trust program was something that previous city council had begun in the mid-2000s, in which the city began acquiring lots through development agreements with developers. And the intent was that those lots would be put into a trust where they could then be used for affordable housing. Around 2010, the city council at that time decided that the program was just not working the way that they had hoped, and they decided to begin selling those land trust lots to builders to build market rate homes. At that time, the intent of the council was to retain the revenues of those sales and then use those revenues to be part of the CDA's affordable housing grants program. So to still use those lots, the lot revenue, to help assist with affordable housing. To date, as I noted in your background packet, those funds have not been allocated, and it's likely a conversation that we should have at some point in the future as to what to do with those funds or the funds of the sale of this lot. But we did determine that there's no contractual commitment or requirements on how the city uses this lot or how the proceeds can be used upon any sale. So essentially, this final land trust lot can be sold, and the city council can determine what they believe is the best use of those revenues. So it's really more of a policy decision on what to use those revenue funds. There's no contractual requirements as to what you can and can't do with it. So for public feedback on this lot, we sent 24 letters. We received 6 responses. 4 of them indicated concerns, 2 did not. Some of those concerns noted were the reduction in green space, some construction and construction traffic within their developed neighborhood, worry about home value decreasing during construction, land and road damage as construction is coming through, and then also the potential removal of trees. And then some of the suggestions that were provided were to leave it as green space and in fact add more trees and or leave the lot vacant. And this is really just another discussion we had was related to the size and setbacks and where these buildings would be. I have a slide like this for each of the properties. This is really just my quick and dirty outline. I am not an architect, so it is probably not to scale, but just kind of gives an idea of where the buildable section within this property would be based on the setbacks of that area. So you can kind of get an idea of where the house would potentially sit if this lot were sold for a home. Would you like me to continue, or do you want to talk about
questions on this lot, council?
Question, do we want to take each lot individually?
I think that makes more sense.
So in my opinion, this one should go on the market and as a buildable lot.
Thank you, Judy.
I agree with Judy, or with Deb.
Thanks, Judy.
That this looks like it's buildable, and it's in a nice neighborhood. Quarter acre, how many houses are being built on quarter acre lots? Is that pretty common?
Yeah, it is with the PUD. A lot of the PUDs, our standard zoning, I believe, is a half acre, or around there. No, less than that.
Third.
Yeah, third probably. So it's not a unusually small lot compared to some of the other lots around.
So, Judy?
What's to the left of it? I just see trees.
Yeah, it is, it's open space, and then it goes out to the roadway.
Highway 5.
Yeah, 5 is up here, so it's just this is open wooded area, and then 5 is to the northwest, comes across there.
Okay, so it doesn't look like they'd be taking too many trees.
No, in fact, with the setbacks and the buildable area, they'd have to stay away from a lot of those trees in the rear yard. So that was kind of the intent of trying to show these setback areas so you could visualize what that would look like.
That was the one that I thought was the most valuable for residential.
So, yes, no?
Yes.
Councilmember Gregory?
100% agree.
Yep, so that's 5 of us, so we'll put that lot up for sale.
Excellent.
Next.
So next up is the unaddressed property at 81st Street in Trillium. This is the lot that the individual who sent in the public feedback comment on was in this area. In fact, it is the homeowner whose driveway we believe encroached into the city property. It's the property, kind of the triangle property farthest to the left on that picture. So as I mentioned, a lot of the discussion on this property was centered around that driveway and were there easements or was it this driveway encroaching and how would that need to be handled. So since then I've had conversations with that homeowner on the property, on the triangle property there. They did provide a survey that shows redrawn lot lines that they indicate that portion, that small portion, as you can see here where that driveway goes, had been sold or conveyed to them. As I mentioned in the background report, the title work we pulled on this did not indicate that sale or conveyance. It had happened, as we were told by the property owner, in the early 80s. So we've got to do a little more homework just to confirm that. I have no reason not to believe him, but just to confirm that. But at least as of today, staff is working under the assumption that there is no easement or encroachment issue and that driveway actually is within the other property owner's lawful property. So public feedback on this one. We had 19 letters that were sent. We received 3 responses and the additional comment tonight, 2 with concerns, 1 with no concerns. This one, again, there was some concern that the setback requirements would force the house to the north, which I'll show you is accurate in the next slide. That would require the removal of many of the mature trees in that area. The concern about the disturbing and destroying this natural gateway from Old Victoria as you're coming through, and then some disruption of lake views of existing homeowners. Suggestions were to keep it as city-owned green space, and then there was also a comment as to whether or not adjacent property owners would have the opportunity to purchase if it did go up for sale. So this one you can see likely would require a lot of tree removal, so that statement from the homeowner is accurate. Just based on the setbacks, because this is a corner lot, you need to have a front yard setback of 30 feet on both street frontages. So that pushes that property 30 feet from 81st, which really gets right into the heart of those trees in that area. With that, I'll turn it over for discussion.
I know in the ordinance it talks about significant trees versus insignificant trees. I mean, what are these, hardwoods, or are they?
Yeah, so the property owner to the northwest that I've spoken to said there's a lot of mature maples. I believe he said some mature oaks. I have not actually walked out on that property yet, but it sounds like there are some mature, well-grown hardwood trees out there.
Okay.
I'll start on this one.
Yep.
I think this would be a beautiful lot. You could get some views of Church Lake. I think it fits well on the lot. You could have your driveway off of Trillium, which isn't a problem at all. If you look on the east side of this, There's 2 very small lots, so it's not like you're trying to cram in an extra lot that wouldn't fit with the neighborhood. That certainly wouldn't be the case. To the north, you've got, I think it's a 5 or 8 acre Salter Park. So there's plenty of green space in the area. A little bit to the east of there is Kirklocken Park, and so there's plenty of park space, plenty of green space. I think this will be a beautiful lot to sell.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I am in agreement with Councilmember Gregory. I think, too, we should sell this lot. I would, though, say that neighbors here, if they would want the first chance at buying it. I know that was, I don't know if we can make that a condition or if we just have to open it up to everybody, but, and then the other question I had is if we had 2 neighbors who wanted to buy this, how could we split that?
Yeah, why couldn't we?
Just like a closed bid and, you know.
I don't think we can reserve it to just the neighbors only, right? If we put it out on the market, and Bob, tell me if I'm wrong here, if we put it out on the market, anybody has a right to buy it. They would just have to outbid somebody else. We couldn't just reserve it to the neighbors to buy it only. Is that accurate?
We couldn't do first right?
Yeah, well, Mayor, I think it's right if you advertise it publicly and say it's for sale and sort of tell the world, put it on the listing. It would be difficult for you to prefer a lower bidding buyer that happens to be a neighbor than a higher. I mean, at that point, you're kind of putting it on the market. Could you, though, go first to the neighbors and say, hey, are you interested? Yeah, there's no legal restriction against the city doing that. In other words, there's no obligation for the city as you consider selling real property. You're not obligated to do public bidding or to somehow have a non-preferential approach to selling.
If we did an appraisal and got a fair market value for the taxpayers, we do have the ability to say to the neighbors, you're going to get a first shot, but you're going to have to pay us whatever the fair market value is?
Sure. I mean, if the council thinks that in your judgment of the public interest, benefiting the folks right neighboring this property makes sense for the community, you certainly can make it available to those folks first. Yes.
Okay. Is that what you would like to do then? Yes. Okay, thank you. Judy? Or I'm sorry, Councilmember Volt, go ahead.
Yeah, if we're going to put it, if we're going to sell it, then I would agree that first rights to the neighbors. I just have a little concern for someone to come in and build there right on a curve. I think it's going to be a problem.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Gregory?
I have no problem with first right of refusal.
All right, thank you. Councilmember Volt?
Well, first of all, I walked that area and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
As you're looking, coming around the curve, you look at Church Lake and there's this breeze that's just invigorating. This is a beautiful area. I'd say provide first opportunity to the neighbors, but I'm kind of torn on having this developed. This would be a great place for some kind of site, natural site for people to come and just relax and look at the lake. And so I don't think it should be sold for home building. Sell it. The neighbors are talking about how great it is. So give them first dibs, and if they don't come up with the money, then I think the city should develop it into something.
So,
into a park space.
right, so my thought is we actually do put it on the market, give the neighbors the right of first refusal, I guess, right? If they can come up with the money at fair market value appraised, then let them purchase that. If not, the park that Councilmember Gregory mentioned, it's, 400 or 500 yards north of this, right? There's a park in there that used to have, like, I think in the old days had tennis courts or something. What's that park called?
That's Kirklocken to the east, or to the west a little bit. But to the north, I mean, the letter writer that you just read, his whole backyard is that 8-acre park.
Right. I think there is a park, though, due north of this property, isn't there?
Yeah, it's a little.
So if we don't sell it, we could make this the park, keep it, and this is where I was going with this. That other park has the potential, I think, to actually extend parking for downtown where people could park and walk to downtown. So if it, before we go ahead and say, let's sell this, do we want to consider actually keeping this, making this the park for that area, taking the existing park, which isn't used at all, and I think we can get a number of parking spaces in there, people can park, and it's an easy walk to walk downtown. So it gives us literally, I don't know the engineering, 40, 50 spaces, right?
How do they access that park now?
You can drive right back in there. It's behind the Bavaria Auto Works.
On Trillium Lane?
Can we go to the bigger map?
Yeah. Okay. I think I know what you're saying.
You'd have to drive down this road to get to that park, but I agree with you, the park, I walk by that park too, and it's not very nice.
Right, and it's not being used every time I've never seen anybody there. So if you put your cursor over for just a moment.
Here's the property we are
Right.
talking about right here.
Right.
And then go up to the park, there, nope.
No, that's not, you're
That
going
open
down.
spot.
It's right
Yeah.
there, that's it.
Whole area.
That whole area. So if you can take this road, it comes behind Bavaria Auto Works, we could actually, it's sloped pretty heavily, where you see the green and the line with the trees. You could get parking in the green, you couldn't do anything with the trees, but if we converted that to parking, there's easy to put a walking path. It's a little bit steep, but it's not bad. But we could build a walking path that comes down, goes under Highway 5, and you're right downtown. So I don't know how many cars we could fit in there, but that's an easy extension for downtown parking, especially when we're doing events.
Would you move the parcel, blowing up? Show the park we're talking about.
Yeah, I can,
So this is the park right here.
That's Salter, and then Kirklocken is a little bit to the,
Kirklock isn't what I'm thinking of.
no,
Kirklocken is a little bit to the west.
if you, yep, there it is, right there.
This is the one I was thinking of,
Right.
Kirklock.
Right, that one we leave,
And it has parking.
right.
Not
No, it
really.
doesn't. It's got maybe two cars.
In order to make your access, don't you almost have to go through Kirklocken to get that slope? Because this is sloped really heavy.
Right, but if you go back there, I've walked this, if you go back there, there's already a path that goes down past those holding ponds.
Okay.
We'd have to go in there and work it a little bit, but there's a path that comes down along the property. You see where this red car is in this photograph?
Yeah.
You go a little bit west of there, and you can't really see it because this is old. But about where the cursor is, a little to the right of that, there's a path that goes down to the water. And I talked with Bill Olson, the watershed. I don't think there'd be any problems if the city built a path from that, going down that slope, around the water, and it connects into the regional trail. And there's the regional trail. So it's maybe 100 yards. I didn't measure it, but I'm guessing maybe it's 100 yards from, maybe 150 yards from, if we put parking in there, to the regional trail system. So that's the concept. The council, given that you guys haven't seen this before, I'd like to propose the council that we let staff, without getting into a formal survey, take a quick look at that and consider that as an option, and maybe come back to us as it relates specifically to selling this one parcel. Is there any interest in that?
Okay, because I've been over there, I never even saw this. I walked and saw all of, this is the trail here going.
Right, they can't see where you're pointing.
On the top part of the screen.
Yeah, you have to
Isn't
put
that
up.
a trail
Yeah.
running across from
Yep.
right up here at the top?
Yep.
Right. There,
That's the regional trail.
yeah.
That's the regional trail.
So I've walked that, I know this area, but I didn't realize, because it looked like it was all wetland, I didn't see any
Yeah.
park.
Right.
It's way up high, you can't see it from there.
Yeah.
So the other thing too is if we kind of not take action on this particular parcel tonight, it'll give council members a chance to go out there and look at that park. I've never seen anybody there. I've never seen it used. And so if we keep the mature trees, we keep that other part where you can look out over Church Lake, and basically just move this park to that parcel, which we already own. And then we can actually entertain options of extending downtown parking. Think of our car shows and other events. If we can get another 40 or 50 parking spaces, walking distance, I think we should consider that.
For special events, I wouldn't disagree, and I wholeheartedly agree, we can look at that. But back to the other parcel, I think it's too small to do anything for a public type use. I think it lends itself perfectly to selling it as a beautiful lot overlooking Church Lake, and I would wholeheartedly agree that we should sell that.
And we can sell that and still pursue this plan.
Exactly.
for parking.
Right.
Exactly.
Right, we could do both. So specific to what the staff wants from us tonight, let's talk about the parcel for sale. I heard, Deb, you say, let's go ahead and put it in the market and offer it to the neighbors first.
Yes, sir.
Judy, is that where you're at with the parcel?
Yes.
Okay, Councilmember Gregory, that's where you're at? Councilmember Vogt?
I'd be in favor of keeping the parcel.
Okay, I think I'm in favor of putting it up for the residents. We can actually maybe, if it does sell, we could use that money to actually build parking, at least offset cost parking. So it sounds like we've got a 4-to-1 on this particular piece. Do we need to actually do a motion? No? Council, any further discussions on this parcel?
And just offer it to the neighbor, first right of refusal.
Correct, first right of refusal. But we need to make sure that we've got appropriate value for the taxpayers, right? Fair market value.
Correct. And Mayor, members of the council, so just to clarify, if the neighbors do not wish to purchase that property, do you want us to hold and bring that back to a broader discussion, or do you want us to pursue sale?
No, I think the consensus is to sell it,
Okay.
but give the neighbors the first shot.
Okay.
And just to note that when we do put these parcels up, we are going to put it out for bid to a real estate agent. Is that correct?
Yes, correct. We're planning to conduct an RFP to actually get a real estate agent broker to sell and market these. So we'll go through an RFP process to bring someone on board to help sell any of the lots that the council chooses to move forward with.
All right, super, thank you. So that's, council, any further discussion on this lot?
Nope.
Okay, Dana, because the council came up and talked about the parking, can you add that and we can bring that up later? Next one, please.
So the third lot is 8420 County Road 11. This is the property that we discussed last time as the former location of the city water tower, and that still contains those footings and foundation of the tower on site. We also discussed during the last meeting that it's currently unsewered and would likely require some significant investment to be able to connect sewer down into that area. So related to the water tower, we did some digging. We had our public works staff looking, I think our engineering staff did some looking, and we tried to find the original construction plans for this tower, and so far we've come up empty. We haven't been able to find those documents. But we did get, just for a visual comparison, included in the packet and shown here on the screen is an idea of what the extent of those footings are in the ground, so you can kind of get an idea of the scale and size. It is likely that we would, if we really wanted to determine exactly what's in the ground, we'd probably have to do some partial excavation to be able to dig down there and see what we are working with. But just from a visual comparison, you can kind of get an idea of the scale of those footings for these types of towers. And then in addition, we did receive some feedback from the county on this one, as they're a neighboring property on some of these properties, and they indicated that they would not recommend adding a driveway on County Road 11 due to traffic levels on Victoria Drive. So that's some feedback from the county as well. So our other feedback with this property, we sent out 27 letters. We received 5 responses to the survey, 5 of them with concerns. Those concerns were an increase in traffic and dangerous access to the property, loss of natural land and trees, loss of privacy for existing neighbors, concerns with setbacks and where that would put the house on that lot, a proximity to the Deer Run tee box, loss of walking connectivity, and cost to city taxpayers to get that site build ready. So some of the suggestions were to create a nature park, to plant more trees and foliage, and just leave it vacant and continue maintenance. And then, as I mentioned, Carver County did respond to about this property. So in addition to the not recommending a driveway connection, they did indicate that there's some interest in that property. And I know it's something that Kara's been discussing with them of potentially being utilized for a trail sidewalk connection to connect the Greencrest neighborhood in that area. And then again, as with the other slides, this is just kind of an idea based on the setbacks of where that building would need to or could sit on that lot.
Is Greencrest the townhomes that are kind of northwest of this?
Yes.
Okay. Isn't that, that's where we were talking about putting the sidewalk up to the intersection along on 43, not,
If they went here, they would come through here, and then there'd have to be a sidewalk or a trail north
right.
toward the corner. But it might be safer to do that than to run along.
Yeah, we're not gonna put a
We're just
crosswalk
looking
here.
at it for a cost comparison, because the other route was so expensive, so we're looking to see if we could, if this is a more cost-effective connection. It looks like it's about the same cost as the other one, but we were gonna bring that to the neighbors in July.
Would
There's
have,
a way to cross the street, there's a trail right across the street.
Doesn't the city need places to put small buildings for equipment?
I'm thinking that's what.
This would be a perfect place to put a small building that is
So-
attractive, that could house some equipment that they need in the area.
So, council, I'd like you to consider this. We've talked about the old Public Works and getting as much parking in there, and Dave has said he wants space downtown for downtown equipment. Why don't we utilize this, since we already own it? This is where Public Works could put their equipment, which would free up more parking space down at the old Public Works site when we convert it.
Right next to somebody's house.
That's a CenturyLink building, right?
There is a residence
North
tower.
of his house.
Right,
There was water tower there before.
right.
Well, that didn't make noise.
Well, this is just where they would store, this would be like a whole building where they would store equipment.
My opinion on this is not a good buildable lot. We should not put a home on it by any means, and I think we should maybe hang on to it, and if it makes sense to put some storage shed or something on that for the city in the future, I think that's a good use of that space. We'd probably have to work through the access to County Road 11, but I would not put this for a buildable lot. That's my opinion on that.
Agreed.
And the access is already there, but at least with a shed for the city, it wouldn't be residential access there'd be far less traffic is my assumption, so.
I'm not
there's-
sure that would be true. If you have one house there and then you've got Public Works people going in and out every day.
Yeah,
I think it's just gonna be there.
There's CenturyLink people going in and out of there every day, right now.
right.
Is there?
Yeah, that's the building just south of there. So it sounds like, Councilmember Millen, hold this, not sell this, correct?
Yes.
Judy?
yeah, it would be great if we could bring that sidewalk up from Greencrest up through here, but I don't, would we have right-of-way acquisition problems going north with those other two homes?
It looks like there's adequate right-of-way going north with the other two homes, but we would have to have an easement across the golf course. But yeah, we just did a high level concept because, you know, the other route is 100,000, which is pretty expensive for the type of connection that is. On a cost per foot basis, it's a pretty costly extension because we have to build a retaining wall in order to fit that in. So the county suggested we take a look at this to see if it's a more cost-effective alternative. It looks like there's right-of-way on 11 to get up to the intersection. But cost-wise, they seem to be fairly similar from a high-level perspective. So our intention is to have a neighborhood meeting in July with the Greencrest folks and these property owners that would be impacted by a sidewalk connection to get some feedback and then get that in front of the council.
Okay, no, I agree.
Part of the budget.
Yeah, this is not a great lot to build a home. It's just too busy of a road and other issues, so I agree, let's hang on to it.
Councilmember Vogt?
You know, onto it, either a trail or a building.
Or both?
There's, CenturyLink is in and out of there every day. You can see trucks there all the time. So there's activity there right now.
Yeah, and I would agree. So we keep it, and we can figure out whether it's a trail, a pole building, or we just keep it in the city's inventory. Council, any further comments, questions? Okay, so this one is not going to be sold. Next parcel?
All right, so the last one to talk about tonight is the 6735 Smithtown Road. This is the property that is adjacent to the South Lakes Virginia Shores Park. And as you'll recall, would likely need to be combined with some adjoining parkland to make a buildable lot. So the biggest topic of discussion on May 11th was centered around whether or not there was programmable park use that could happen in this area. That item was directed to the Parks and Recreation Committee on May 19th, and I know Mayor Funk that you attended that meeting, so you can weigh in on that as well. But summarization of the conversation is that from their perspective, expanding the use in this area was not high priority. There were some concerns that the grades and the tree cover and past resident feedback make this section less likely to be upgraded and programmed in the future. They did talk specifically about the sledding hill, and I think the conversation was that it would likely be cost prohibitive due to the number of trees that would need to be removed in that area. And then ultimately, they voted unanimously to recommend the property be sold along with a portion of parkland, and that those proceeds be directed to the Park and Trail Fund of any sale. So, sorry, that's what we just talked about. Summary of feedback. In this property, we sent out 18 letters. We got one survey response with concerns. That individual expressed that they were opposed to the city selling designated parkland. And then also expressed some concern that the elevation issues on that lot would be a challenge to even try to build a home there. And their suggestion was to leave it as is or develop it as parkland. The county also weighed in on this property, as you saw in your background report. They had expressed that there could potentially be a use for stormwater treatment ponding as part of the Arboretum area transportation plan. In our meeting last week, we talked about this a little bit, and I think the consensus was that if it was there and available for them to use, they would probably use it. If it wasn't there and available, it wouldn't kill the project. Is that a good summarization of what that conversation was with the plan folks? And then again, this just this shows the buildable area of just that one parcel, which is pretty small when you're dealing again with those corner lot setbacks. And this is likely some sort of scenario like this would need to take place where a portion of that parkland is also combined with that parcel to sell for a single family home.
So if that, I'm struggling with what the county said here for stormwater. There's a big ravine there. What are they envisioning? Some sort of like a pumping station or something and piping stuff?
It would be a pond. So with all the proposed roadway improvements, they're constantly looking for available land that is publicly owned to put in a stormwater treatment pond. So just your typical stormwater treatment basin, because all of those improvements will require additional treatment through regulation. So they look very quickly for publicly owned land first before they, want to have to consider purchasing land from a private property.
Could this save the city in the future as far as part of our portion of the Arboretum plan?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, if it's our land, you would factor that into any dialogue one might have related to cost participation. But this specifically would relate to improvements at 7 in Rolling Acres Road, and it does seem like those are probably 10 years into the future. So that, as Marty was indicating, the technical team hadn't already identified this as the ultimate location for the site, for stormwater ponding. So it didn't seem like they would be terribly troubled if the city decided to part ways with it, but it reduces an opportunity.
Got it. Okay. Council, comments, questions? Who would like to go first?
I'm not sure how you make a pond out of a hill. Anything can be done, but it doesn't seem practical.
We'll build retaining walls.
There you go, there you go, make a huge.
The part by, like where the well site used to be is pretty flat.
Right.
It's not very big, but it's
But this
pretty
spot,
flat.
in and of itself, is pretty high. I like the concept of adding property to it. Once again, it just would be a gorgeous building site. I think it would be, this is land that we're not using. It doesn't lend itself well to any type of a park. I'm in favor of selling this, combining it with land in this picture right here.
So expanding the parkland into a buildable lot.
Yep.
Got it, okay.
I too am in favor of that. I'm wondering about what is the process to get that parkland included in a buildable lot? Is it just saying we're gonna do it?
No.
Yeah, no, Mayor and Council, you'd have to put yourself through a regular subdivision combination process. So you'd subdivide off a chunk of the park and combine it with this lot that you're talking about and formalize that in a resolution, and that would become a conveyable lot.
But we as the council can do that.
Yeah, sure.
I would be in favor of that, yes.
Okay, thank you. Judy?
Well, have we considered what, by building on there, we're taking impervious surface now, and we're gonna have to worry about drainage. And it's right next to the lake. Have we thought about that? How we're gonna affect the environment by adding a home there?
Well, there's other homes in that neighborhood, so.
I know, but
I would
you know,
assume that
like
that's.
one more, you know, that's my question, is do we have enough there, or is one more gonna be okay, or is one more gonna just put it over the edge?
The lot would be, because it is in the shoreland overlay district, because it's 1,000 feet, it would be limited to 25% impervious surface on that lot, which is the shoreland requirement, whereas typically outside of shoreland, we allow up to 35%. So there would be some limitations on impervious on that lot.
In other words, you don't think there'd be a problem here?
I'm not an environmental engineer, so I couldn't say for certain, but I can say we would have some restrictions on the lot impervious.
Specifically getting to the point that Judy brought up.
Right, it would have to retain 75% of that lot would need to maintain impervious.
Got it. Judy, any other comments?
With that being said, do you think that between only being able to use 25% of that for your building and having to grade, since I guess it's pretty hilly over there, do you think that that is going to be a desirable lot?
The space is there, the grades are definitely a challenge, right? I mean, it would be, a builder's gonna have to determine, you know, what makes sense financially, because they're gonna have to level some stuff out. I think if you're looking at it two-dimensionally from size, then yes, 25% impervious, I think you could get a home there that meets that. I couldn't speak for the cost or the extent of what would need to be done with grading, to get that ready to build.
Okay. So, yay, nay?
Marty, if you had a guess, what is the lot size as drawn here?
So I believe that parcel is a little more than, a little larger than what the original parcel is. So we're probably creeping up close to a half acre, probably 0.4, 0.5, because the original small parcel is 0.2. If you almost double that, or maybe a little more than double that, you're probably looking at around 0.4, 0.5 acres with both pieces.
Nice size lot.
So we build 100 and some houses a year. What's the average impervious surface per house?
For any district outside of the shoreline district, which is a shoreline district is anyone within 1,000-foot buffer area of a lake, it's 35%.
That's the regulation, but in terms of what they're actually building, what does it come out to?
Okay. A lot of the newer developments get close.
So it would be tight to build a house and a driveway and hit 25%.
It would definitely involve some, you know, some creative architecture, but it happens all the time.
Okay.
You know, we've got lots smaller than this that are within a shoreline that can maintain that 25% impervious.
I've seen them do paver driveways to, which are not.
Which that makes it, the driveway then is pervious.
Right.
Yeah, there's some creative solutions to reduce your pervious on some of those things.
They just couldn't build a swimming pool.
We actually consider a swimming pool as a pervious structure, so a swimming pool itself doesn't count against it.
How do we do that?
The pool itself is just water. We do count the apron if it's larger than 2 feet, I think we count against it, but we do count swimming pools as pervious. So.
Really?
One sell, Judy, did you want to sell, expand it and sell it? Councilmember Graham?
Sell it.
Expand and sell.
All right, it's unanimous. Expand and sell this one.
Excellent. I have just one more slide, and I think I got most of the direction I was looking for on the sale of the lot. I was wondering if the council wants to seek any further resident feedback. As I said, we did send out letters and had people respond to a survey. But if the council would like there to be any additional resident feedback on this before we move forward or as we're moving forward. And then in addition, if there were any other questions or information, at least as of now, doesn't sound like there's anything additional you'd be looking for.
Council, any need to reach out again?
Yeah, the only thing that I was thinking is the first right of refusal from each one that we've agreed to for the residents that are there, if they want to buy that property.
Well, why don't we do it this way? We've already notified all of the neighborhoods, right? Do we want to put something out that says neighborhoods adjacent to these properties will, for each of them, will be given the first shot at purchasing them? And if they don't, anybody in?
In my mind, the one on Trillium is the one that makes the most sense for that. I don't think
The other two doesn't matter to you? All right, I'm,
Prolonging the process.
yeah, I would agree. So,
Ask, and if they say no,
Just one more step.
all right, well, they'll still have the option to buy it anyways.
yeah,
So,
sure. All right.
So I don't think, I'm not hearing from the council that we need any more input, right? Is that all you needed then?
That's all I need.
All right, super. Thank you, Marty. Next, we have roundtable. Council members, anything to bring up that we'd like the staff to look into? Hearing none. Reports. Bob?
Mayor and council, you're all looking well. It's nice to be here. I have nothing to report.
I know paying that $100. Dana?
Nothing from staff, Mayor.
Council, any reports?
No reports.
No? I've got nothing to report. So at this point, can I get a motion for adjournment, please?
Motion, we adjourn.
Thank you. Second, please.
Second motion.
Discussion? Hearing none. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. We are adjourned.